use any one of this package you have to use. So here we are not basically importing any one of the package, but still what we are doing, we are getting this exception. So how we are getting this exception? So remember, in Java programming language, even though you are not importing any package, so by default package which you will get in your Java is like import java.lang package, right? Remember this point. You will always get import java.lang package. So inside our java.lang package, what we have all these classes, right? So all these classes like our exception class and or something like that, like our string class, all these classes are inside our which class? Your lang class, right? Now in our exception here, you can see over there they have there are many other pre-exist. So these are inbuilt classes. So if you are getting error, your exception related to your input output, if you are not handling these such kind of exception, these such kind of statement, then you will get input output exception. If you are not handling SQL database query related, basically whenever you are performing database connectivity, if you are not handling those such kind of exception, then you will then it will go directly to a SQL exception class, like that. Similarly, we have runtime exceptions. So in our exceptions are already our runtime, okay? But still, again, what they have done, they have categorized, they have created one more class, and that is known as our runtime exception class. And inside this class, whatever the classes that are there, our compiler will not able to basically find it out, okay? Whether this statement will give us any error or not. So that is why all these error, all these exceptions that comes under the category of our runtime exception class, we generally call these exception class as what we call it as your unchecked exception class. Means our compiler won't be able to access. Means if we are having in our program, like in this example, we are getting runtime exception, okay? So arithmetic exception class comes under the your runtime exception. So if we are going to compile this code, then our code will execute it, means compiled successfully. Why? Because during compile time, our compiler would not able to find out what kind of your exception, your runtime exceptions, right? Like that. So this is all about. And what about your exceptions? So all other exception except your runtime exception class, or whatever the siblings of these your runtime exception class, all other classes comes under the category of your checked exception. It means if you are writing that statement, it is mandatory for you, like I have shown you one example, is that now here in this scenario, see, right now what I'm saying is that this file is there in my system, right? It is right now, it's there, but still if I'm going to compile this code, then what will happen? I will get a compilation error. And in that compilation error, again, the same message I will get. What message I will get? That I will get some sort of, sorry, just remove this thing. I will get this error that java.io.file not found exception, right? But still I am saying that we are having that access of that particular file. Why? Because whenever we are performing these such kind of operation, so what we have done, we in our compiler, we have already given some set of rules that if you are reading these such kind of, if you are reading something, or if you are creating some sort of connection, so first of all, what you need to do, you have to basically handle these such kind of exception. Handling means that what if you are not able to read this file, okay? Suppose you have delivered, suppose this is your project and you have delivered your project, and now what happens, somehow you are not able to access this particular file, then what will happen? You already know that suppose we are not getting any compile time error, so during runtime what will happen? We are not able to execute our program successfully. It means our termination of our program will become abnormal, and we don't want that, right? So that is the main reason. What we want, we always want that we should go for the normal termination, and we want to make a maximum thing, maximum errors should come under our during our compile time. Okay, so that is why we have put it put some of your exception under the category of our compilation time. But still, these errors are what these are not basically compilation error. These are our checked exception, right? Like that. Similarly, whatever the other exceptions we have, like during runtime. So if I'm going to compile this code, so my code will work successfully, right? But during compiled runtime, it will give me an error like this. Now, so till now we have an idea about what do you mean by exception, why we are getting it. Now the thing is that okay, we suppose if we got some exception, right? So what we already have default exception handler. But as you already know that our default exception handler is doing what? It is terminating our entire methods, whatever the methods where we are getting that particular exception. And later on what it will do, it will basically terminate our program abnormally. Means if there are some statements that are there after that particular statement. So I have already shown you few examples. So through these examples you have already gone through that. Okay, after this thing, see, I'm able to basically, this is, I think this example is quite better than that. So you can see here, I will be able to see what first it will execute this statement. So I will get university, then I will get Greater Noida. Then here you can see in this statement, if I will get an error, so I won't be able to execute this statement as well as this statement, right? So that is the reason. So here we are getting default exception. So we are basically executing our default exception handler because we are not handling our code. But right now in every scenario, we don't want that we should directly call our default exception handler. So we want to handle this code whenever we are getting that particular exception. So that is why in our last lecture, we have discussed and we have gone through our try and catch block. So what do you mean by try block? So try block is a block where you are feeling like, okay, that might statement give us some sort of, or some that it might throw an exception, or that particular statement might have something which will lead us to give us some, like during either it will give us compile time exception or runtime exception, like that. Okay, so in that scenario, those statement, what we generally do, we will put. So here for this our entire three statement, I will look up on my this particular what this particular program, and I will find out. Okay, for me this statement is fine. Now here I will say, okay, it might be possible. Right now I am just giving you 50 divided by 0. What if we are having some expression like that? Okay, so in that scenario, you have to use it. Okay, suppose if we are having C by D, and here C we are computing some value and D we are computing some value, and user is giving his or her input during runtime, right? So what will happen in that particular scenario? So it might be possible we might get D is equals to 0. Then what will happen? Automatically we will get what? Our runtime exception, and we don't want that. So that is why I first of all we have to find out like which statement will give us or some sort of what we call it as your risky code, right? So once we will find it out, okay, this statement will give me what risky code. So I will put that statement inside my try block. So once I have written my try block, now it is mandatory for me to either go for catch block or either go for finally block. Okay. So there are two blocks that it is mandatory to write. Either you should go for catch block or try block. So in last lecture, you already know that and it is again very important that in catch block, what we generally do, we generally handle this exception. So this exception, we should also aware about like this exception comes under which class. So if you know the class, then you directly write down arithmetic exception. But as you can see, sir, it's not always that we will able to find out that this exception comes under what particular category or what particular class. So if you don't know that this 50 divided by 0 comes under the category of your arithmetic exception class, so what you will do instead of that, you just directly write down exception, right? So that directly write it down exception. Why we are writing exception? Because here you can see directly that exception class is a super class of all these classes, right? So if you are able to write down exception, so it will run. So it will not give us any error like that. Okay. So similarly, we have basically discussed about all these scenarios in our last lecture, that the exception object will check whether we are handling it or not. If we are handling it, so it will execute the rest of the code. If we are not handling it, so our JVM will directly again call that terminate the program. Then again it will basically call our JVM if none of our method is executing, and it will print the exception description, stack trace, and your terminates the program abnormally, right? Like this. So, and you already know that for our try statement, so you might have a question like, what if we are not getting any exception, right? So it might be some scenario that you are not getting any exception, but still you have used these two statement, try and catch statement. Then what will happen? Then if we are going to execute these particular kind of scenario, so you can see over there we are getting Bennett, we are getting university, we are able to execute this statement, and we are getting greater node, and here we are not executing this statement. So why we are not executing this statement? Because here we are not getting any exception. So our catch block will execute only when we are basically what, whenever we are getting an exception, right? And you can have what, you can have multiple catch blocks too. So we have already discussed that you can have multiple catch blocks too, and you should know the hierarchy also. Okay, first of all you have to write the catch block of subclass, then you have to write down your superclass. So you cannot write down first a superclass and then you cannot write down subclass like that in this scenario, and don't write down both of them as the same catch block like that. Okay, so in that particular scenario what will happen, you will get an compilation error. Remember this one. So whenever you are basically want to execute multiple catch block for a single try block, so it's better, it is always recommended to first of all just write down subclass and then go for your superclass like that, right? Now, so this thing we have learned so far. So now in our today's lecture, what we are going to do, so we are going to discuss about our new block that is known as your finally block, right? So now we have an idea about that. Okay, in try block and in catch block. Okay, so using try and catch block, what we are doing, we are handling our exception. So if we are getting any exception, so basically we are executing our catch statement, and based on that we are able to terminate our program normally, right? Now in our Java programming language we have one more block, and that block we generally called as your finally block. Okay, we generally called as what, your finally block. And remember, your finally block will always follow your try block, remember. So the order is very important. First of all you have to write try block, then you have to write catch block, and then you have to write finally block like that. Okay, now the question that comes into your mind is like, okay, if we are getting some exception, that is correct. So what we are doing, we are basically calling our catch block, right? And in catch block basically we are handling our exception. Then what is the need of finally block? Okay, what is the need of this basically particular block? So see, go through our definition. So finally block is used to perform cleanup activities. Remember this point. Whenever you are going to use your finally block, so we will always perform your cleanup activities that we related to your try block. So like I have given you one example in our first lecture of our exception handling, is that suppose we are holding the resources of some as your server, okay, some database server, and we are getting some exception, then what will happen in that particular scenario? So we are not able to basically terminate somehow, and we are holding the all resources of that particular server, right? So how we are going to basically sort out these particular kind of issues? So in that particular scenario we always use our finally block. Means whatever resources we open in the try block, so if you are using some resources, then what you will do will be closed inside your finally block. Now the question that comes into your mind is, sir, if we are basically closing those what we call it as your resources. So we can also close these resources in our catch block. Why we are not putting it? So I will tell you why we are not able to do it. Okay, so what are the advantages of finally block? Why we cannot basically performing? Yes, any question? Okay, like that. So remember that Java finally block is a block that is used to execute important code such as closing connection, closing a file, etc. So whenever you are basically reading some file and you want to close something, right, and you might get some sort of exception, so you have put it where you are reading that particular file and you put it inside your try block. So always remember that whenever you want to close that file, so put that particular statement inside your finally block. So Java finally block is always executed. See, this statement is very important. That is why if somebody is going to ask you like in interview or something like that, that why we are not using catch block for that, because you already know that we are not able to execute our catch block every time. What if we have created one catch block which is basically handling arithmetic exception, then what will happen? We are not able to handle it. Okay, then it will never execute our catch block. But in the case of our finally block, remember we are able to basically execute, and it will always execute whether exception is handled or not. So whether you are getting some exception or not, whether you are handling that particular exception or not, every time your finally block will get executed. This is very important, right? And Java finally block follows try or catch block. This is very important. Either it will follow try block or either it will follow catch block, right? So if you are in a program, if we have try, catch, and finally, so that will be your order. If we have only try block, if we are not writing catch block, then we can directly go for finally block too, right? Like this. So this is basically the flow chart of our this thing, okay, of our finally block. So this is our program code. So suppose in one of the statement we got some exception, okay. So we have to check whether we are getting any exception or not. If we are getting an exception, so we will check whether we are handling that exception or not using catch block. If we are handling that exception, so again we are executing our finally block. If we are not handling that exception, still we are executing our finally block. And if we are not getting any exception, still we are able to execute our finally block. So all in all your possible cases, we are able to basically execute our finally block. So that is why whenever you want to perform some sort of this operation where you just want to close some sort of resources, so it is always recommended, right, to always try to use your finally block. Remember this point. This is very important that you just always try to use your finally block. Now, let's take a few cases, and using few cases you will understand, and in future whenever you are getting the concept and you will find out something in some of the source code, you will find out this keyword of finally, then you will understand, okay, what is happening over there, right? So in our first case is finally example where exception does not occur. So here in this scenario, you can see over there, we have a class, we have public static void main method, and inside try block, still we are basically put it these two statements. And if we are getting some exception, so we are handling, we have put it null pointer exception, and we are executing. This is how basically we are handling our exception. And then in our finally block, what we are doing, so it's up to you, whatever the statement you want to write, okay? But it is always recommended to basically write down those statements which you just want to close, okay? If you want to close some resources or if you want to release some resources, always try to put those statements inside your finally block. But just in order to make you understand that how, what will happen if we are going to execute this code, so let's check it out. So in this code, you can see directly here that we are not getting any error, right? So I think 25 is missing over there. So I will get 25 over here too. So if you will see over there, so we are not getting any exception. So first of all, it will basically execute this statement and we will get 25 over there. So we are not getting any exception over there. So it will not execute our catch block. And after that, automatically what it will do, it will execute our finally block statement, right? So this statement it will execute, and then after that it will execute our rest of the code. So in our first case, we are not getting any exception. Now, in our second case, what we are doing is we are basically where exception occurs and not handle, right? So you already know, because I'm using keeps on using the same example so that you will not have any issue related to that why we are getting an exception. So whenever we are performing divide by zero, so we are getting runtime exception, right? Like this, or runtime exception, or we generally call it as your arithmetic exception. Now, if we are going to execute this statement, then what will happen? I will tell you. First of all, it will execute this statement, then it will go into try block, and it will check our compiler, our JVM will check, okay, whether we here what will happen. So automatically, what will happen? We will get an exception over there. So automatically, it will intrinsically, okay, you are not creating intrinsically, it will create an object and of our arithmetic exception, that we are getting what your arithmetic exception object. So it will create arithmetic exception object that we, and it will also display the message also that we are getting an exception. Why? Because of divide by zero, right? Like this. So intrinsically all things are basically occurring over there. Now after that, what will happen now? After once we will get this thing, automatically my JVM will ask my main method, okay, are you handling this exception or not? Please let me know. Then my JVM will say, yes, we are handling this exception. That is the reason we have put it inside your try block. And what will happen? It will, our main method will say, okay, what I will do, I will check it out in the catch block whether we are handling it or not. Once it will go and check in the catch block, then what our JVM will see is that, okay, in our main method we are not handling our arithmetic exception, we are handling our null pointer exception. And null pointer exception is the sibling, okay, remember, a null pointer exception is not our parent class of arithmetic exception, they are sibling. So it means that this error doesn't come under this category. So that is why it means our JVM will, our main method will say that, okay, we are not handling this exception, but we have a finally block. So before basically going releasing, before terminating our main method, it will check whether we have a finally block or not. So yes, we have a finally block. So automatically what it will do, it will execute this statement. So if we are going to execute this particular code, so you can see over there, it will directly execute over this statement, that is your finally block is always executed. And then after see this statement as well as this statement, both these statements we are not able to execute. Remember this thing. And just after this statement, we will, because of default exception handler, we will get this particular error. Remember this point, okay? So we are not able to execute this statement. Why? Because this statement is not inside our finally block. So whatever the statement that are there inside our finally block, only those statement we are able to execute, right? Like this. Now in the third statement here, what we are doing, we are handling our exception too. So here what we are doing, again the same scenario, but here you can see over there we are handling it, right? So in particular scenario, you can see directly that what will happen in our particular case, we will get this output. Okay, I think I have put it something like that, but it will directly execute, and this is the output we will get. Like finally block is executed, rest of the code, right? And then whatever the exception you are getting it, then you will get that particular exception. So there is some problem with the order, right? Like that. Now this you should note it that for each try block there can be zero or more catch block, but only one finally block. This is very important, right? So it's not like that you can create multiple or several blocks over there. So it is mandatory that you can create, you can have only one finally block. So if I am going to again write it down finally, right, over there, then what will happen? I will get an error. So the finally block will not be executed if program exits Okay, so I will tell you one example of system.exist so that you will understand that only in one scenario. Okay, so in Java, what we have one function named as your exit, and using this exit, we are able to basically terminate our program, right? So if you are getting these such kind of scenario, then only in that particular case we are not able to execute our finally block. So if somebody is going to ask you like, can you give us some scenario where we are not able to execute our finally block, then you will say that when we are getting the scenario like system.exit, right? Or by using fatal error that causes your process to abort. So simply we never get these such kind of errors, but yeah, somehow if you have written this statement and after that if you are writing this your finally block, then yeah, you are not able to execute your finally block. Otherwise, in all other cases, your finally block will fall. Now, so till now, what we have learned so far is that okay, if we are getting, we know what are checked exception, we know unchecked exception, we know that if we are getting an exception, so what will happen? Our basically JVM intrinsically they are creating the object, okay, intrinsically. Now what if we want to create our own exception? So right now we are using whatever the exceptions we are creating or whatever the exception we are using. All these are exceptions are your inbuilt exceptions, right? Now what I want to create my own exception, right? I want to create my own exception class. I want to create my own exception object. So how can I create my customized exception? Right? So now I want to create my customized exception. So what I mean to say is that so that you will understand and you will have a better understanding over there is you can see directly. Yeah, where is that graph? Yeah. So what I want, like there are already there are some inbuilt classes, right? Like this inside your exception class. Now what I want to create my own exception class. Suppose I want to create my own exception class as what Mohit exception class, right? My named as what. So not like this. If I want to create my own exception class, so how can I create my own exception class over here? So remember this entire hierarchy because we are going to basically somehow we are going to use it in our this particular concept, right? So we should have an idea that how can we create our own exception? How can we say that okay, if we are getting these such kind of scenarios, so we can create our own exception class. So in Java, you can create your own exception class too. So let's check it out. How can we create our own exception class, right? So in Java, what they have done, they have given us one more. They have basically proposed one more keyword that is known as your throw keyword, right? So they have used this keyword no, named as your throw keyword, where in that particular case, you can basically throw some your exceptions by your own. Means you if you want to create throw some exceptions, okay, like by your own, means if a programmer wants to throw some sort of exception, so he or she can directly will be able to basically throw that particular exception. So whenever we are basically throwing that particular your exception object, so we have to use this keyword throw keyword, right? So let's check it out, and using example I'm 100% sure that you will able to understand it now. So let's go through the definition. So sometimes we can create exceptions object explicitly. So right now whatever the objects we are creating, like in this case, are we creating this exception object by our own? No, we are not creating this exception object. Then who is creating this exception object? Our JVM is creating this exception object. If we are getting 25 divided by 0, so this is what is happening in that particular scenario. Our JVM is creating some exception object. Now what I want to create my own exception object. So I want to create my own exception object. So how can I create this object explicitly, exception object explicitly, and hand over the object manually, for which we use your throw keyword. So sometimes if we want to create some exception object explicitly and hand over the object manually, for which we always use your throw keyword. Remember this one. We always use your throw keyword. So the Java throw keyword is used to explicitly throw an exception, right? So if we want to create throw that particular exception, so what we generally do, we generally use this keyword that is known as your throw keyword, right? Now, so using this throw keyword, we can throw either your checked exception as well as your unchecked exception. Unchecked exception means your runtime exception. Checked exception like your IO exception, SQL exception, other than your runtime exceptions, whatever the other exceptions we have, we that all these exception comes under the category of your checked exception. So you can create whatever the object of your checked exception object or unchecked exception object. It's up to you. You can throw it by your own. So hence the main objective of throw keyword is to hand over the object manually to JVM. Right now we are handling this object manually. Otherwise, in this case, we are not handling this object manually. Automatically, intrinsically, this JVM is basically creating that particular object and they are somehow performing that particular operation. Right now, we are going to handle this object to our JVM. So how can we do it? So let's check it out. And this is very important. Note that throw keyword are used for your custom and user defined exception. So if somebody is going to ask you like through which keyword, via which keyword we are able to create our user defined exception or custom exception. So you will say that, okay, we have to use throw keyword. So using through keyword, we are able to create our objects, exception objects here explicitly, right? So let's take first example. So this is our first example, and using this example you will understand what I mean to say, right? Now I have created one class, right? Now after creating this particular class, what I have done, if you will see directly that there are two methods, out of which one method is my main method and second method is what my static method or static void validate method, right? So there are two methods over there. Now, as you already know that what we are doing, whenever we want to execute something, whenever we are executing our code, our first statement is what? Our first statement is basically related to that it will always execute your public static void main method. So once it will execute our public static void main method, then it will execute this statement. And here in this scenario, again, I am revising the concept, but I understood that all of you have an idea about that thing is that why we are directly, how can we basically directly call that particular method? Because this method is what my static method, okay? So that is why I can directly call this method if we are working in the same class. But if you are working in some different classes, then I have to use either I can use objects or either I have to use your class name, right? So there are two modes through which you basically you can call that particular class. So once I am going to call this particular class, so see what I have done over there. If my age is less than 18, right? So I have created some logic that if your age is less than 18, then what we are doing, we are through. See this keyword we have used. So just leave this keyword right now. Okay. So now I hope that you already have an idea about what this new keyword will do. Through this new keyword, we create an object. Now we are creating an object of which class? Your arithmetic exception class, right? And this arithmetic exception class, they already have some default constructor. So in that constructor, what we are doing, or they are having parameterized constructor too. So in that constructor, we are basically passing this message, right? Of you're not valid. So now we are creating an object, okay, of this particular what we call it as your arithmetic exception object. And here what we have created, if your age is less than 18, otherwise if you are going to execute your code, you will never ever get any kind of exception, right? But now for this particular case, what we want to create our own exception. Now once I have created this your exception object, now after that what I want to do, I just want to basically throw this particular exception, right? Now using this throw keyword, what we are doing, okay, we are directly throwing this exception object to our JVM, right? Otherwise, what will happen? We are not able to get any exception over there. But here in this particular scenario, what we are doing, we are basically throwing this particular exception to our JVM explicitly. Remember, explicitly. Now, so once we are going to execute this code, then what will happen? So during, if we are going to compile this code, so what will happen? Whether we will get an error or not? No, we will not get any error whenever we are going to call this code, compile this code. Why we are not? Why will we will not get any error? Because here we are creating an exception object of your runtime exception, right? These exceptions are what your unchecked exception. So unchecked exception, for unchecked exception, you will never get compilation error. So that is why during runtime you will never get any error. But remember, during runtime, whenever you are going to execute this code, then what will happen? I will tell you. So as I already told you that it will execute this statement, then I will go here. Then you can see my age is 13, 13 is less than 18. So it will throw an exception object, then it will go directly to my JVM. And it will say that, okay, this is my object, right? Otherwise, intrinsically, whenever I have shown you an example, 10 divided by 0, same thing is happening, okay? But that particular operation, we are not able to see. Okay, but here we are doing it explicitly. Now our JVM will do the same operation. It will ask our this validate method. Hey, validate method, are you handling this exception of this arithmetic exception? So our validate method will say that no, we are not handling. So can we see any try and catch block? No. So it means that we are not handling it. Now it will go to my callee method. Okay. So who is calling this your validate method? Then again, what it will do? It will JVM will ask, hey, main method, are you handling this exception? So again, you can see directly that it is our code is not handling that particular exception. So that is why just after this statement, what it will do, it will terminate our entire program and we will get this error, that exception in thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception. See, the message which we are getting it over there is not valid. See this message, whatever the message we have passed via this constructor, we are getting over there. And here I haven't shown you this stack trace. So still you will get stack trace like at your validate and at your main. So you already know that about your stack trace like that. Okay. So this is how basically. So if you want to throw your exceptions during by your own explicitly, then you can use this throw keyword and you can create your own exception object. So, but here for this particular example, you can see directly that we are creating this particular exception by our own, right? So we are using like predefined classes too for that. But in our second example, let's see what we are doing. So in our second example, I have created one class named as your bank class. And see, this bank class is doing what? This class is inheriting our runtime exception class, right? So you already have an idea about, okay, we have a runtime exception class. So it is inheriting that particular class. So yes, it is valid in Java. We can inherit that particular class, no issue at all. Why? Because we already have java.lang package, and in the java.lang package, we already have all these classes, right? So we can inherit these classes. Now inside this bank class, what I have done, I have created a constructor, and this constructor is your parameterized constructor, which is just displaying the message. And it is, you can see here, it is basically calling your parent class. So here my parent class is what? Your runtime exception. So using super keyword, you already know that what is the functionality of your super keyword. Using super keyword, whatever your parent class, your immediate parent class, you will be able to call their immediate parent class constructor, right? Like this. So this is how basically I have created my own customized, you can call it as your bank class, exception class, you can call it as, right? Now, Now in this program, what I want that I want to create a program in such a way that if your amount is less than 1,000 rupees, suppose you want to create or you want to develop some business logic. So suppose every time remember that whenever you want to create your own business logic, then only in that particular scenario you always create your own this your customized exception. You will create your these exception classes by your own, so that your client will understand, okay, these are the issues that might occur, okay, so that you are not able to process something like that. Okay, now here what I want based on our current scenario is that suppose in your account, if your amount is less than 1,000 rupees, then what it will do, it will throw an exception of which class? Your bank class, right? And you already know that our bank class is now is also an exception class of your runtime exception. So it comes under. So during compile time, if I am going to execute this code, so I will not get any error. Remember this point, because this is again an following this class is comes under the category of your unchecked exception, right? So once I am going to execute this code, then what will happen? It will automatically execute this statement and it will check whether 990 is less than 1,000. So this condition is true and it will go directly inside this statement. And here what it will do, it will create this object of bank class. It will call the constructor, whatever the constructor we have, and it will throw this particular object directly to our JVM. Now JVM will have, now it is mandatory for our JVM to handle this exception. Now again same operation will happen like occur, that our JVM will ask our main method, hey main, are you handling this exception? So main will say, no sir, I'm not handling these exceptions. So JVM will say, okay, so if you are not handling it, so I'm terminating your method abnormally. And just before terminating your method abnormally, I will call my default your exceptional handler, and whatever the object you have, it will display that particular message, right? So that is why if you are going to execute this code, see what we are getting exception in thread mean C. Here we are getting bank class, because here we are getting an exception, we are creating an object of bank class. So our default exception handler will show us an example, display a class in which class you are getting an error exception that belongs to our bank class. And what message I want to display, that is your transaction unsuccessful, right, at main. So this is what my stack trace is, because right now I don't have any multiple methods over there. So automatically what it will do, it will directly call what my this method. Okay, so this is how basically you can create your own customized exception, right? Remember this throw keyword. So, and you already know, because I'm not focusing a lot on this keyword, because you already know that how to create an object, right? Like this. And using throw keyword, if you are not going to use this throw keyword, then it will never go to our what? To our what we call it as to our JVM. Okay. Otherwise, if you are not going to use it, then you might get an error like that. So you already know about Java exception propagation. So I'm not going to revise the same thing, because I have already explained it earlier. But over there, I forget to mention the terminology. Okay. So if somebody is going to ask you about, okay, can you tell me about what do you mean by Java exception propagation? So whenever you already know that, what if whenever you are having methods and these methods are calling your other methods like that. So let's take this example, and through this example, you will understand what do you mean by Java exception propagation. So in this code, whenever we are going to execute this program, then what will happen? First of all, it will execute this what we call it as your public static void main method. And here what we are doing, we are basically creating an object, right? So here what we are doing, we are creating an object. That is correct. We can create an object, no issue at all. Once we have created an object, then what it will do, it will execute this statement, and that is statement it obj.p. So we are calling this method. So once we will call this method, so what you already know about Stacktrace. So initially we have main method. So now we are calling what your p method, right? So once it will call p method, so you can see here in p method we are calling again n method. So automatically now it will call what your n method. So this is nothing but this is known as your propagation. But why we are calling it as exception propagation, we will see. So now after n, again it is calling your m method. So now we will get what your m method over there. Now once we are going to execute our m method over here, so now you already know that what will happen, we will get an exception. So once we will get an exception, what will happen? So automatically, because intrinsically, what will happen? I will tell you. Intrinsically, for this particular scenario, it will create an exception of like this: arithmetic exception throw. We are not writing it, but intrinsically, what will happen? I will tell you. Right? Divided by zero, like this. Okay, throw new arithmetic exception, divide by 0. So automatically intrinsically it will create this exception, and it will throw this exception to our JVM. Now JVM will have this object, right, of this object, and it will ask my m method, hey m method, are you handling this exception? So m will say no, I'm not handling this exception. So whatever so here we don't have any other statement, but still what it will do, it will terminate our m method abnormally. Now after that, it will delete this entry from our stack. Now it will ask n method. Hey n method, because you are calling this m method, so are you handling this exception? So again, n method will say, no, I'm not handling this exception. So again, what it will do, it will terminate this method abnormally and it will remove it from our stack. Now it will ask p method, okay, hey p method, are you handling this exception? So p method will say, yes, I am handling this exception. So use, because we are having try and catch block, and remember, not only catch block, but in catch block we are handling this exception, because arithmetic exception comes under your exception class, right? So automatically it will display this exception and it will terminate, because we don't have any other statement after that. So it will terminate this p method normally, okay, and it will display this message. And after that, what it will do, it will basically display this particular normal flow. Why? Because now our entire this p method will be able to basically what this handle this particular exception. So right now we are basically handling it properly. Okay, so that is why if we are going to execute this code, I forget to put the your output. But if you will see over there, if you are going to execute this code, so the output which you will get over there is exception handle, and then in the next line we will get the output as what your normal. Okay, so this is nothing but we generally call it as your exception, your what propagation, right? So here this is just an example which I have already shown it over there, right now. So I hope that you have understood so far. So now I'm not going to start. This is the only last topic which is left. Okay, in our Java programming language, that is your throws keyword. So if I'm going to cover this, so again it will take more than 30 minutes. So in on our Monday lecture, I'm going to cover this particular topic of your throws keyword. Okay, so is there anyone who is having any doubt related to your till now, whatever the doubt you have related to try catch in with respect to your exception handling, feel free to ask. Yes, anyone is having any question, any doubt?